So, one of the problems that I find with the queer community is that there's no space to speak openly and honestly about oppression that is specific to females. And that's because whenever there's a discussion in the queer community surrounding women, there is always relentless pressure to include trans women in the conversation without acknowledging our differences in how we are oppressed. The queer movement is very, very male centered. There's a lot of focus on gender transgression, and I feel like a lot of people are so caught up in being PC about gender and people's gender identity that they don't want to acknowledge or recognize that biological sex plays a huge role when we're talking about oppression. I admit that in most cases, when I'm speaking about women's issues, I'm talking about females, okay? And that's because I'm a female, and so my experience is from the female experience, and that's what I'm going to speak about, okay? I can't speak for anybody else, but my own experiences and what I've seen from other people. This is a Venn diagram of women's oppression, okay? My intercourse video represents a global epidemic of fuckery against women, and it does not include trans women, okay? It's only specific to females. However, as you can see, if we come over to the middle here, if we're talking about sexual harassment or rape, or in the case of some fetishization, then all women face it. And then there are also some things that trans women face that females will not have to face, okay? And as you can see, there are just about, equal amounts of things that we all have to deal with on both sides, but they are different, okay? And those differences need to be acknowledged, okay? This diagram is not by any means meant to be comprehensive, but it's meant to just give examples of different things, and you can feel free to add as you wish, but this is just an example, okay? I accept trans women as women, but because trans women are not female, I don't accept them as being female, okay? If you notice, I'm using the word female instead of cis women, and that's because I don't believe in the cis trans binary, because I don't believe that females are privileged on the basis of gender. Trans women and females are oppressed in different ways, and the defining factor in that distinction is biological sex, because sex matters. Womanhood, on the other hand, is a gender identity, and that identity is socially constructed. Womanhood is an identity that is forced onto females, okay, throughout our lives, girlhood and womanhood. For trans women, womanhood is an identity that they feel that they embody, okay? Even though I'm rooted in my identity as a woman and I'm proud of it, that does not change the fact that socially and culturally, womanhood is just an abstract concept that is used to oppress people on the basis of gender and get us to conform to these fucked up gender roles. A couple months ago, I made a video called Being Queer Does Not Make You Radical. And I talked about the fact that I encountered a grown man who had no intention of living as a woman. He was very violent, he was very sexist, and he abused my female friend. And he identified as a woman and as a lesbian, okay? And I didn't accept it. I didn't accept it personally because, not just because of what happened with my friend, but also because when he is identifying as a woman, he is appropriating and exploiting not just my experience, but and females' experiences, but also trans women's experiences. But either way, he is proof that legally and socially anybody is free to identify however they want to, okay? A grown man who is actively exploiting women is able to identify as a woman and enter women's spaces, okay, if we allow for that type of shit to happen. The thing is that not everyone can identify as female, and females are a globally oppressed class in and of ourselves. That means if we created civil rights and legislation around women or womanhood simply for the sake of including, of allowing anyone to enter the group, including trans women, we would be ignoring the fact that females are distinctly oppressed class, and that females need to have certain rights and legislation in place to protect ourselves. Not to mention, we would also be allowing anyone to enter the women's group because woman is, again, a gender identity. It is, it's a social construct. It is not something that is concrete and defined. Okay, females cannot be grouped in with trans women all the time because we have been oppressed on the basis of sex. Most trans women have lived as boys and men for some time in their lives. The fact that trans women are oppressed on the basis of gender does not mean that they are exempt from sexist modes of thinking. It doesn't mean that they have not benefited from male privilege, and it doesn't mean that they still don't benefit from some forms of male privilege. And that's because trans women were born as males, okay? Hence the term male privilege, and because sex matters, biological sex matters. In this society, having a working penis or a male reproductive system counts as a form of male privilege. People really need to be more sensitive to the fact that females have been oppressed on the basis of biological sex, and that oppression creates real traumatic impacts in our lives, okay? I recently read an article by a woman who used to be married to a man before he transitioned and began living as a woman. She was married to him for 20 years. In the article, she described her former partner using the he, him pronouns, okay? And she got a lot of backlash for it. People accused her of being transphobic for using the he, him pronouns, and so the article was taken down. Okay, I personally agree that, they shouldn't have published that article to the public without some sort of context, solely because people could look at it and say that it's okay to use the wrong pronouns to regard or address all trans women, okay? But I also thought the way that people responded to that article was really fucked up and really insensitive, and that kind of backlash was really just sexist. You'd think that maybe people would be sensitive to the fact that she thought of her former husband as a man because he dicked her down for 20 years and they had a baby together and he left her with the baby. And on top of that, he could have, more than likely, he did have sexist modes of thinking and internalized sexism, and they could have been actively acting out those oppressive gender roles in the relationship, okay? I guess we're just supposed to turn a blind eye to that and, just throw her entire experience as a female away in favor of her former husband. Let me be honest, okay? If any of the men who I've had intercourse with in the past, whether it was consensual or not, if they raped me, if it was consensual, whatever, okay? If we had sex or we had intercourse at some point and they came up to me, looked me in the eye, and they were, even if they were presenting as women and they demanded that I see them as a woman, I would refuse. Okay, and that's not because I hate them. That's not because I don't want them to have civil rights. That's not because I don't want to respect their gender identity just because they happen to be living as women. No, that's because when they were busy shoving their dick into all of my orifices and I was risking pregnancy and they were not, I was having sex with a man. I was being raped by a man. I was having intercourse with a man. I was not having sex with a woman, okay? That was my experience. That was my lived experience as a female, and that needs to be respected just as much as anyone else's experiences, because that shit is real. And those experiences have stayed with me my whole life, and it's not going away just because of the way that someone identifies themselves on the inside. Having a uterus and a vagina is not just some exclusive club for women who happen to be able to bear children and make babies that we want to exclude trans women from. It is a very real experience. Being raped and knocked up and forced to push out a child that you don't want and forced to breastfeed it, and if you're poor or if you're a woman of color, likely in America, living off of welfare and supporting the child off of welfare for its entire childhood and adult life, that is not a form of oppression to ignore, okay? That is a reality, and that is how a lot of women are living. and that is not something to be ignored, okay? And it gets a lot worse when you get outside of the country. Having your clit cut off because people think it's dirty is not something that's to be ignored, okay? It's a real life thing, and it only affects females. Not just erase it as something that we can't talk about just because it's uh, not universal to all women. The other thing is that being female surpasses your gender identity, because trans men and genderqueer people who are female face the same exact oppression for being female. Okay, that female oppression for trans men does not go away just because they choose to live as men. Okay, even though for in the case of trans men, they don't identify as women, and they might experience some forms of male privilege that trans women don't have. Okay, it's called intersectionality. Okay, it's not all one thing or all the other. And it's true that trans women do face unique forms of discrimination, but that discrimination is largely rooted in them being associated with being female, okay, and occupying the female sex role. And their oppression is compounded because patriarchy does not agree with males who choose to live openly as women. Okay, it's an abomination. But trans women are not the only male-born people who are oppressed on the basis of gender. Okay, queer males in general are oppressed on the basis of gender because they are also associated with being closer to occupying the female sex role, especially if, for example, they are more effeminate, or they are on the receiving end of any penetrative sex that they might be having. They are associated with the female sex role, and so they are relegated to a lower class status, okay? Trans women are oppressed on the basis of gender, not sex. Only females are oppressed on the basis of sex. But all gender oppression is still rooted in the hatred of femaleness, okay? A couple months ago, I went to take an HIV test at an organization that is for queer youth of color. And the person who administered my test was a Black trans woman. And, she told me that she started a caucus, a group specifically for trans women, because she felt that the women's groups that included trans women did not accurately address issues that were specific to trans women. And I thought that was a great idea. I told her that that's something that we should be doing more, is that we should have caucuses. I'm sure, if she decided to announce her group to the organization, then I'm sure most people there at least would be very supportive of it. But I can assure you that if I, for example, wanted to create a group that is specifically for females, I would receive a lot of backlash, and a lot of people would accuse me of being transphobic. Now, this is not about the Oppression Olympics, but it's just about being honest. Why can't we be honest and acknowledge that we have differences, that there are differences between trans women's experiences and females' experiences, and there are similarities as well, and organize around that? People need to stop playing gender police and calling certain women transphobic when they want to organize around women's issues that are specific to females, knowing fully well that most women are female. Most lesbians are exclusively attracted to females. Stop telling lesbians that they need to have sex with trans women in order to not be transphobic. And also, people need to learn how to support female-only spaces, support trans women-only spaces, and also support and create women's spaces that are, for all women. I'm against the idea that trans women and females cannot organize together politically, because the truth is that we need to organize together in order to make real progress, okay? You cannot have a situation in which females make gains and trans women are left behind, and you can't have a situation where trans women are making gains over females, okay? Because that can happen too. I also don't support the erasure of certain forms of oppression just for the sake of being PC, and that definitely includes female oppression, okay? And I really think on this issue, the queer community needs to get its shit together. So that's all I want to say, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Peace.